introduce our next speaker. This is a presentation by Ethan Temeles, Department of Biology, Amherst College, Amherst, Massachusetts. The title of his presentation is Hurricane Maria Alters Hummingbird Pollination Relationships and Natural Selection on an Introduced Island Plant on Dominica, West Indies.
Okay.
Ethan, it's yours.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for the invitation to participate in the symposium and also for translating my slides. Well, as we've seen, hurricanes are known to lower the abundances of nectar-feeding birds, which in turn can lower the reproductive success of the plants that they pollinate. Weather hurricanes can also alter relationships between plants and pollinators and create novel ones, as well as alter the strength and direction of natural selection on floral traits and pollinators has received little study. Here we report on the impacts of Hurricane Maria on a highly specialized pollination system involving the purple-throated Carib hummingbird and its native and non-native Heliconia food plants on the island of Dominica, West Indies. Purple-throated Caribs are native to the mountainous islands of the Lesser Antilles in the Eastern Caribbean. It's a large hummingbird that exhibits pronounced sexual dimorphism in size and morphology. Males, such as the bird shown on the right, weigh about 10 grams, whereas females weigh about 7.5 grams. In addition to their sexual dimorphism in size, purple-throated Caribs exhibit pronounced sexual dimorphism in bill morphology. Adult males, such as the bird shown in the upper right panel, have bills that are short and straight, whereas adult females, such as the bird shown in the upper left panel, have bills that are about 30% longer and 40% more curved. Work that I've done with my students over the past 20 years indicates that each sex of purple-throated Carib is the primary pollinator of one of two species of Heliconias native to the Eastern Caribbean. Males are the primary pollinator of Heliconia caribea, which on the island of Dominica has two color morphs, red and yellow, and short straight flowers corresponding to the male bill. Females are the primary pollinator of Heliconia baha'i, which on the island of Dominica has one color morph, red with a yellow stripe, and much longer curved flowers corresponding to the female bill. Reproductive isolation and divergence in floral traits between these two Heliconia species is driven and maintained by competition between sexes of purple-throated Caribs. Males exclude females from Heliconia caribea via interference competition and territoriality, whereas males in turn are excluded from Heliconia baha'i by exploitative competition with females because their short bills put them at a competitive disadvantage when trying to extract nectar from the long flowers of this plant. On September 19th, 2017, Hurricane Maria passed directly over the island of Dominica. It was a Category 5 hurricane at the time with 270 km/h winds. It was and still is the greatest natural disaster to occur on Dominica in the island's history. I visited the island of Dominica in April 2018, 7 months after Hurricane Maria. And what I found was that the hurricane completely removed the canopy from the rainforest. You're looking at photographs I've taken on the west side and east side of the island, and you're seeing the remaining tree trunks with all the branches knocked off. Most of the green vegetation you are seeing are vines, mainly mile minute vine and morning glory vines growing up from the forest floor. My visit to Dominica was timed to coincide with the peak flowering of the native heliconias. But what I found when I arrived there was that the hurricane had suppressed flowering of the native heliconias, and they were lagging behind in growth, although they were recovering. The only heliconia I found in flower at the time was Heliconia wagneriana. Heliconia wagneriana is native to Central America, and it was introduced to Dominica as an ornamental plant. It has escaped cultivation and has now become naturalized at many sites on the island. When I arrived on Dominica, it was in peak flower, and spent inflorescences indicated that the plant had been in flower since about November 2017. In contrast to the native heliconias, its flowers are much longer, and it also produces about 60% as much nectar per flower. Serendipitously, Gabriella Bishop, one of my undergraduate students, and I had studied the pollination biology of Heliconia wagneriana 4 months prior to Hurricane Maria in May of June of 2017. We studied 2 populations, and what we found is that the only hummingbird visitor to Heliconia wagneriana was female purple-throated caribs, which have the longest bill of any hummingbird or sex on Dominica, and that's shown in the right panel. We also looked at whether there was any selection on floral traits in Heliconia wagneriana in 2 populations, and we found absolutely none, as shown in the left panel. I repeated our studies of pollination biology on Heliconia wagneriana in April and May of 2018 after the hurricane, and I found that in contrast to prior to the hurricane, where females were the only visitor to Heliconia wagneriana, after the hurricane, short-billed male purple-throated caribs were the primary visitor in both populations, accounting for 55% of the visits. Moreover, visits by males to Heliconia wagneriana were non-random, and males preferentially visited the shortest flowered plants in both populations. Inspections of flowers after male visits indicated that they could only completely remove nectar from the shortest flowers of these plants. The left panel is showing you natural selection on floral traits, and what I found is that because of male preferences for plants with the shortest flowers, they exerted extremely strong selection for shorter flowers in both populations of Heliconia wagneriana that I studied. Based upon observations of hummingbirds at feeders around hotels, as well as captures of hummingbirds in the rainforest, I estimate the population numbers of purple-throated caribs to be about 20% of their pre-hurricane sizes. You are looking at histograms of measurements I made of bill length on the left, wing length in the middle, and tarsus length on the right for males in the top row and females in the bottom row. The white histograms are measurements I made of 50 male and 50 female purple-throated caribs in the decade prior to the hurricane, and the black histograms are measurements I made of about 15 to 20 purple-throated caribs after the hurricane. And what you can see is that bills of males after the hurricane were significantly longer, whereas their wings and tarsus lengths were significantly shorter than before the hurricane. I found no difference in bill lengths of female purple-throated caribs before or after the hurricane, but their wings and tarsi were shorter after the hurricane than before the hurricane. We interpret the shorter wings and tarsi of male and female purple-throated caribs after the hurricane as natural selection favoring smaller size, possibly because smaller birds were better able to meet their energy requirements due to reduced food supplies. We interpret the longer bills of male purple-throated caribs as a direct result of Heliconia wagneriana, because only males with the longest bills could remove nectar from the long flowers of this plant species. Consistent with these hypotheses, birds that we captured at feeders had significantly shorter bills and larger wings and tarsi than birds in the rainforest. I was able to visit Dominica in 2019, and I found that at the time, in May and June of 2019, the native Heliconias were flowering a year and a half later, although their peak flowering was delayed into June. Purple-throated Carib populations were still only about 20% of pre-hurricane levels and very low at some locations, such as freshwater and Bouré lakes, where I only observed one individual, and normally observe up to 10 or 20. Pollinator visits were 10 to 30% of pre-hurricane levels, and seed set was about 2 to 20% of pre-hurricane levels. I also found that the hurricane had created some novel relationships with the native Heliconias. Recall that Heliconia baha'i is normally pollinated by female purple-throated Caribs, and females have accounted for about 99% of all the visits we've observed in our 20 years of study. At Bouré Lake, the only visitor to Heliconia baha'i that I observed in 2.5 months of study was a single male purple-throated Carib. This male visited plants with the shortest flowers, and as a result of his preference for short-flowered plants, he drove extremely strong natural selection for short flowers in this population in this year, in contrast to 3 previous years of study prior to the hurricane, where females drove weaker selection for long flowers in this population. Well, to summarize, hurricanes may alter relationships between plants and their pollinators and even create novel ones. Such alterations may change the strength and direction of selection on floral traits and perhaps pollinator traits. Lastly, non-native plants may buffer the impacts of hurricanes on pollinators, and were it not for the flowering of Heliconia wagneriana, it is likely that mortality of purple-throated Caribs would have been greater than what we recorded. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Ethan, great presentation. Interesting stuff. I'm looking for some questions coming up here or comments. One comment, of course, was speedy natural selection. Yeah. Fast evolution.
Yes, and I think when I started doing this study, I have to say, I'm not doing this study for myself. I'm doing this study for somebody 20 years from now. I look at this and I think, we have to get the data to know what's happening. And the question is, how quickly will this recover? If you had asked me about this system, I would have said it was the result of long-term evolution, but I suspect that hurricanes like this one are the timer that disrupt the system and put it on a different evolutionary trajectory. And it'll be very interesting to see how long it takes to get back to what I observed prior to the hurricane.
Interesting. Question, comment here. Nice talk, Ethan. Do you expect these the selection direction to be long-term?
That's a very good question. I would say regarding the plants, if you look at the strong selection on floral traits, reproductive success in the plants is nonetheless very low because so few of them are getting visited. So it's a question of what an impact that's going to have on the population. With the birds, I was actually surprised by year 2 that they weren't recovering as fast as I thought they might. And so I was not able to get to the Dominica this year, and I'm not even sure I'll get there next year. Let's hope that everything works out and we can get back into the field. But yeah, I suspect that this could take another 20 years to recover. One point I want to make is Lugo visited Dominica in 1983 after Hurricane David and estimated that it would take about 40 years for the forest to recover. I started working in Dominica about 20 years ago, and the forest was in great shape. But one of the differences now is that a lot of invasives have come in on the island. And so the question is, will they then end up replacing the vegetation and change things? somewhat differently. And so that's the other factor that can affect the recovery of the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. There are other questions here. I'm going to have to hold off on them,
Sure.
unfortunately. Let's see if we can carry these on to later this afternoon, but excellent talk and very much appreciate it.
Yeah,
So I
you're
need
welcome.
to